Hello and welcome to another EFL Manager special from the Honest Football Podcast as we head over to Hillsborough and Sheffield Wednesday because Darren Moore at 9:05ish this morning has been appointed as manager, leaving Doncaster to do so. So there's a lot to dissect. We'll get on to the new man and we'll talk about that in a moment. But firstly, we've got to talk about the outgoing man because we always do that first. And in this instance, that also gives us two to talk about because we've got Tony Pulis, the last permanent manager, who was part of our last Sheffield Wednesday special in the eye above. And then we've got Neil Thompson, who obviously did a good job as interim manager, but then had a crashing defeat at my beloved Luton Town at the weekend. So let's talk about Tony Pulis first, Charlie. I think it's fair to say you were one of the few people who said this is going to be an absolute disaster, both on and off the pitch, because you thought he would clash with the boardroom, which led to his sacking. You thought he didn't really suit their style as a manager. You were looking for someone like Paul Cook. And would it be fair to say, with one win in 10 games, that on the pitch, you were probably proven right?
Yeah, I don't want to be like the sort of, what's the word, the oracle or anything like that, because one of the few predictions I've actually got right. But do you know what it is? It's just, I think it happens at any level of football. Certain managers suit certain styles of play in certain teams. And I just looked at that squad and just thought, this isn't a Tony Pulis team. It's not an industrious one who's going to get around that big strike and play for second ball and all that sort of thing. And I don't like going down that route, but that's essentially, and he's effective at that. I'm not knocking Tony Pulis, but this was not that squad. Josh Windass, for example, you saw him at the weekend. He's not that big centre forward who's going to go bullying centre halves. And that's what Tony Pulis is about. It's about getting off that second ball. Almost a bit like if you watch Millwall this year. Sheffield Wednesday is almost the antithesis of that. Very fragile, technically a good side, but just not a Tony Pulis team. So I was amazed they went for that. It was always going to be a short-term job for him anyway, because it is of a lot of places he's been recently. I just couldn't see it clicking. And I'll be honest, he went earlier than what I thought he would have.
Yeah. And I mean, although the results on the pitch weren't great, I mean, they only lost half their games. They were looking a bit more solid. I think the biggest thing was the thing that we all predicted, which was just before the January transfer window, the fireworks about what should happen during the following month eventually led to him leaving, didn't it?
You talk about a club who, what's the polite way of putting it? Financially, we're not sure what's going on there. I'm not entirely sure the people who are meant to know what's going on do either. And that's the difficult thing. So then you've got someone who's quite bullish in their approach, who wants to say, right, I want this player, this player, this player, and doesn't necessarily take into account that kind of stuff. That's the impression we got from the outside. Obviously, we're not in those conversations, but it was never going to end well. I'm not saying you wanted a yes man in that situation, but someone who's maybe a tad more understanding of the plight of the club, really, which, you know, whatever we're going to say for the rest of this episode, Sheffield Wednesday is a massive institution of English football, and it is a shame we're having to do this for the second time in less than six months almost. You know what I mean? And that's worrying for me, but I'm sure we'll get onto that in a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we'll move on to the off-the-pitch stuff later on because the Sheffield Wednesday fans, I think, have more questions than answers on that front. But let's talk about Neil Thompson in between, because actually, in terms of a caretaker manager, for a prolonged period, he did pretty well. For the first 6 to 7 weeks, he did a very solid job in rejuvenating that squad.
Yeah, and I just think when you watched, they weren't necessarily spectacular, but I think they played to their strengths. And I think maybe, I don't want to go over the whole thing again, but it was square peg, round holes with Tony Pulis. I think he just got the best out of those players. But I think, as you will probably testify more because you watched the game on Saturday, and I mentioned it in the prediction show, I'm not taking anything away from him, but a bit more of an experienced manager might have handled that game a little bit better. You know, obviously a flying start in the first half against Luton, but the second half, obviously the wheels start to come off a little bit. And I think we'll talk about who's coming in. I think when you've got an experienced manager, they just know how to handle that game, maybe waste a bit of time, maybe make the right substitutions. And you're doing a fantastic job, but that enthusiasm and that motivation can only get you so far. And I think that's the difference between the Championship and other leagues, is that's where that experience counts in those situations, in a club that's in a relegation fight, you know? So I think he did a fantastic job, but it was never going to be a long-term solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we both mentioned it in yesterday's prediction show. You said, obviously, it's probably just gone on a little bit too long as an interim or a caretaker. And for me, I said, I'm pretty sure there'd be someone in charge on Wednesday night, against Rotherham. And here we are with Darren Moore at 9:05 on Monday morning. So give me your initial reaction, because it's come out of the blue to both Doncaster and Sheffield Wednesday fans. I think we knew they needed a manager, probably based on the weekend, but I didn't expect it to be this or this early.
No, I've got to be honest. I think this is probably one of the most astute appointments you're going to see of all of these specials we're doing in the next few weeks, because obviously there's a few other clubs that are probably going to have to do these for. You know, his record is fantastic, nearly 45%. Given the difficult journey that Doncaster have been on themselves, you know, I think he stabilised the club there, won a tremendous amount of games that probably didn't have the right to win. And I just think that, you know, he plays a good brand of football. We saw that when he was at West Brom as well. albeit, that part, the later part was out of his control, in my opinion. I think he got a bit stitched up a little with that. But in terms of on the pitch, I think this squad is perfect for him. He's got that sort of technical ability, but I think he'll recruit well. And that's one thing I would say when he's been at Doncaster, his recruitment's been fantastic. So I'm sort of expecting the same. It's whether the only downside to this, and the only caveat I'm putting on this is the financial situation off the pitch, is whether that's going to hinder a bit. He's going to have to spend some money. He can't survive in the Championship on free transfers and loans and stuff like that. Is hopefully they back him enough, because I think similar to what you and Craig were saying about Nigel Pearson, if you give him the time and the resources, I think he'll do well there. And so that's, for me, probably one of the best appointments we're going to see this year.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And obviously, just to bring it all back to a bit of irony, when he took over at West Brom in April 2018, I know there'd be one in between, but earlier that season, Tony Pulis was in charge. So plenty of fun to go about there. But as you mentioned, he's got a really good record at both clubs. I think it'd be fair to say with recent Championship specials, he has been vaguely linked with a few jobs this season. And in recent weeks, that has impacted Doncaster. It has to be said first. We talk about Sheffield Wednesday being on a poor run now, but Doncaster, before he left, 5 games without a victory. Is it possible that even from the manager side, we talk about it with players a lot, that the speculation maybe, or if this was going on behind the scenes, we've seen it with Nathan Jones at Luton a few years ago, could it potentially have had an adverse impact on Doncaster?
Yeah, I mean, do you have your head turned? It's the only thing I would say is I think it's a fantastic appointment, but he's potentially taken over a team that's obviously in the relegation zone. I mean, Doncaster, they were on a terrible run, admittedly, but they were the 2 games in hand on Sunderland and Portsmouth all above them, and actually 2 wins would have put them in potentially 4th place.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's bizarre, isn't it? But then I don't know. You don't know what's going on behind the scenes. I do think once you get your head turned, it is tough. Do you lose a bit of that enthusiasm, that bit of that motivation? And does that, even if you don't mean to, subconsciously come out in your work? Possibly as an argument for that. That's what's happened here. But, I think, whatever, I'm not a Doncaster fan, but I think you could still hold what he's done to the club in high regard, regardless of how they might see how it ended. Maybe it could have ended slightly better, but I think he's done such a fantastic club and left them in a fantastic position. What obviously happens to them, I'm sure we'll do in a different episode. But I think he could walk away from there proud of the work that he's done there.
No, I completely agree. Both on and off the pitch made a big impact, as he did at West Brom, to be fair. But coming back to it now, is perhaps that part of the reason he's been considered? Because he obviously took over at a very similar time at West Brom in the Premier League. They were obviously a bit more marooned than Sheffield Wednesday are now here in the Championship. But he almost dug them out of there. His motivational skills, his man management skills were considered second to none by a lot of his players at the time. And then he rebuilt a side in the summer and had them in the top 6 the following year. So Sheffield Wednesday perhaps looking at both elements, whether they stay up or go down, and think he's the right man for either situation, perhaps.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think you summed it up perfectly, and I think that you've got a man who it's not a specialism of his, but it's a proven track record, and I think that's what you need with a club like this. You need stability. You need someone that's consistent, and I think with Darren Moore, you're getting a consistent manager who has got that background of this situation. You're not throwing in someone. I've said about in different manager ones, maybe giving someone else a chance lower down the leagues, etc. I don't think this was the right situation necessarily. That you needed consistency. You need someone who knows what they're doing in this situation and knows how to work in this environment. And I don't think there was many people out there currently available or would have taken that job as it stands at the minute. So I think they've got the best of what they could get, really. And I think that's a fantastic appointment.
Well, I think you've sort of asked my devil's advocate question for me, which is we do have to try and have a balanced debate here. And there are negatives at Sheffield Wednesday we've got to talk about, because off the pitch, there's been a bit of a disaster. And that's my only question here with the Darren Moore situation. I think he's a fantastic appointment. But based on the time it's taken, do you have to ask if he is first choice? Or is it that many people that he wanted didn't want to work for him? Because you have to question otherwise why it would have taken 2 or 3 months, unless they were trying to get by to the end of the season, of course.
Maybe like you were saying about the Doncaster's form, maybe it was lined up for the end of the season, sort of get to the end of the season, then we'll take Darren Moore, let him finish his job at Doncaster, and possibly it's got to such a crisis point now, it's like, right, we'll just pay whatever you want and we'll get him in. I don't know, I can see where you're coming from with that, actually, because it would worry me a little bit about maybe how long it's taken. But then I don't know who else would have been on their shortlist, really. I know you have the same old names in the merry-go-round, but really, who was available, who would have been interested, who was capable of possibly getting him out of this situation? I don't think there was many people. I personally agree with you. I think on the former bit that maybe they were trying to wait to the end of the season, then we'll get Darren Moore in. And I think it's just got to the point where we can't keep losing like this, and we need to make a change immediately. So maybe that's what happened. And that would explain possibly Doncaster's form as well.
Absolutely. But we've got to talk about the rest of the season now. Sheffield Wednesday, 6 points from safety at Birmingham, and they've got 1 game in hand, although Rotherham, 1 place above them, have played a game less. But that brings us full circle, because on Wednesday night, Darren Moore's first game It's a Yorkshire derby at home to Rotherham. There's then a couple of very difficult games against Reading and Norwich in the top six, but then Huddersfield at home. There are some home games that he'd probably be targeting here, particularly the first two against Rotherham and Huddersfield.
Yeah, looking at the sort of way that Sheffield Wednesday have been this, especially last 5 games, 2 goals in the last 5 games, that has, and obviously those two are Saturday, so, and, I don't want to go over the old ground, but I think you probably would agree Luton's defensive woes in the first half probably gifted them. What I'm getting at is that I don't think they've been potent enough. That's one thing you'll have to address. Normally we say about the back four, and obviously that needs to be an issue because they are losing games, but to not really be posing any sort of a threat would worry me. But you're looking at teams like Huddersfield, who defensively are probably not the most sound team in the league. So, that's got to be his first instance. Can he get something out of this front line? Because it is a good front line. On paper, about it, for example, Izzy Brown, Jack Marriott, former Luton players, Jordan Rhodes, etc. I don't know what's gone wrong there on the front line, but I just feel like if he can squeeze something out of that, Sheffield Wednesday will do well. Because actually, up to these last 5 games, they were defensively quite good. They didn't let a lot of goals in. Prior to the run they were on, they were actually quite a good banker when we were doing the predictions a few months ago. So about a month or so ago. So I think if he can eke a bit more out of that front line, that's got to be his first priority. And Huddersfield would possibly be a good game to try and get that sort of a result. Rotherham are a bit hit and miss as well. So it could be off to a flying start or could be even more tough than what it was before.
And how frustrated are you, on a very quick side note, that this has come about 12 hours after we did our predictions, where we all went for Sheffield Wednesday to not win on Wednesday night?
Well, yeah, I would say, though, in your defence, you did predict this, so I probably should have heeded that warning.
Yeah.
And it happened with, obviously, Bristol City, last Sunday, you did the same thing. So, but no, I don't know. I think with Bristol City, it was a bit easier to get a result out of them. I think it could be a bit tougher, but I'm sure we'll get to that.
Absolutely. I think we're both in agreement that he's certainly the right appointment, or a very good appointment at least. But we've got to get to our favourite questions at the end, which is what we see for the rest of the season and beyond. In fact, it's one of the few where the statement doesn't mention length of the contract or how long he signed on for. So it'd be interesting to see what's there. I can't imagine he'd have left Doncaster just till the end of the season. So there's got to be a longer term deal in place. But for the rest of this year, Charlie, what do you see from Sheffield Wednesday? We've mentioned 6 points from safety. We've mentioned a couple of very big home games coming up in the immediate future. Do you think Sheffield Wednesday will survive like I did at the start of the season? Or are you sticking with you and Craig?
Oh, I don't know. Do you know what? Tomorrow night is so pivotal. When you look at that table, it's such a, because they're obviously they've played one more game than Rotherham. Birmingham have suddenly picked up a result of the weekend that I don't think anyone gave them a hope of getting. Coventry, I don't like saying this. I don't know if they've. No, do you know what? I'm going to back him, actually. I think teams like Huddersfield, you've mentioned it quite often. Huddersfield are on the slide. I think from Derby upwards are fine, to be honest. So you took 19th down. Huddersfield are on the slide. Coventry hit and miss. I think they might do it. I think Birmingham might have just been a flash in the pan at the weekend. So I'm banking on that. Sheffield Wednesday, but it'll be like by 1 point just outside the relegation zone. What he has to do, though, a quarter of their goals have come in the last 10 minutes. That has to be something that's addressed. 26% of goals they conceded between the 81st and the 90th minute. So if he can sort that out, I think they'll do it.
I've got to agree with you, to be honest. And the reason I'm agreeing with you is purely based on my pre-season predictions, because I went for Coventry and Huddersfield, obviously, to be in trouble. And they've probably been the two sides sliding at the moment, and Rotherham, but after a very tough run of games. So I'm going to bank on him to finish above them. As you mentioned, it's going to be between 20th and 23rd, isn't it, realistically? But I think they can do it. So we're going to put our faith in Darren Moore for this season. And then that begs the second part of our final question, which is for next season and beyond, will Darren Moore be in charge first and foremost? And given the fact that basically every transfer window, there's been chaos between the owner, the chairman and the manager in situ at the time, can you see this being a long-term success, or are we going to get in the same loop and the same circle once we get to August and September?
Do you know what? If you give him the time and resources, I think maybe next coming season could be in and around the playoffs. I don't know if they necessarily have enough to get there, but the following year, give him enough time, I reckon he'd be in well within the shout of that. The shame is, despite me talking about the whole episode, I'm not confident with the board at the minute that they'll give him that. So I don't know. I'll be honest. My head is saying probably mid-table mediocrity next year because I don't think he's going to get the right amount of backing. But my heart wants to say, if you support him, he'll get you up there. That's sort of, it's a bit of a wishy-washy answer, so I do apologise. But it's the reality, unfortunately, with Sheffield Wednesday's leadership at the minute, that it's hard to really make bank on anything. There is no consistency. There is no sort of clear leadership there. So it's tough to make these sort of predictions. So on that basis, I don't know. Could go one of two ways.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I actually think mid-table mediocrity is probably more likely next season because it's a massive overhaul needed there. There's a lot of experienced players in the team, and I mean experienced as in probably going slightly past their prime. There's a lot that can't do 2 games a week, which is going to be a regular in the Championship, obviously. And in terms of the transfer window, as you mentioned, the board, it's just been chaos all year. If it hasn't been something on the pitch for Sheffield Wednesday, it's been off the pitch statements. So it's something I worry about. And I do worry about Darren Moore taking this job because I feel like it could harm his reputation if it ends up going wrong when it probably doesn't deserve to. But that's all for this episode. We obviously think Darren Moore's a very good appointment for Sheffield Wednesday, albeit a very surprising one. And we'll obviously get to Doncaster once there's a new appointment there too. But thank you to Charlie for joining me at this very early hour of Monday morning for a very special managerial appointment. If you did enjoy it, please do put a thumbs up on the video. Subscribe down below for regular content from the podcast. You can catch up with our championship predictions for this midweek up in the eye above. And you can follow us over on Twitter at HonestFootball3. We've got a Sheffield Wednesday themed interview coming tomorrow, so make sure you check that one out too. And hopefully we'll see you next time.